Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin, aye.
Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote? Hearing none, on this vote the yeas are 55, the nays are 44. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam President.
The Republican leader.
May we have order?
Will the senators please take their conversations out of the well?
Mr.
Please,
President.
now. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, we need order in the Senate. People should take their seats. Republican leader has some words he wants to share with the Senate.
The Republican leader.
Yeah, Madam President, on my leader time, just very briefly, there is substantial support on this side of the aisle for the Ex-Im Bank. However, it's important that we get this bipartisan jobs bill that passed the House overwhelmingly, that the President supports, on down to the President. And so it's going to be my recommendation to my members, which I hope they will follow, that we oppose cloture on adding the Ex-Im to this bill. And I would say to my friend, the Majority Leader, I've discussed with virtually all of my members, we believe that if you turn to the Ex-Im matter, we can pass it in a relatively short time with very few amendments related to the subject matter. But I think it's important that we get this jobs bill down to the President. And I would urge my colleagues at this particular point on this particular bill to oppose cloture.
Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
I had a meeting very recently with people from the Pentagon. Their number one issue is not Afghanistan, it's not Iraq, it's not Pakistan, it's not North Korea, it's not Iran, it's cybersecurity. We have to move to that legislation. The post office is going broke as we speak. We have to move to that bill as quickly as we can. Violence against women has expired. We have to move forward on that. We have so much to do in such a short period of time. Madam President, The Ex-Im Bank is a powerful piece of legislation. 300,000 jobs this year alone. It saves $1 billion. And my Republican colleagues, as has been standard procedure around here, even on a bill that is as supportive of this by the country, want to have a fight. The fight is on a procedural matter that they want to offer amendments, plural. And as my friend, the Republican leader, said, we could pass this bill in a relatively short period of time. Think about that. Right now, we could pass that. It would be part of this IPO bill that we got from the House. We could go on about our business. So, Madam President, I think that this is a huge mistake of my Republican colleagues. Everyone listen. Ex-Im is, for the foreseeable future, not going to be able to move forward. I can't move it to the front of everything else when we have all these things to do. And I've only talked about a few of the things that we have to do, and we have to do them very, very soon. So go ahead, my friends. You picked a fight where there's not a necessary fight, but you may be surprised how this winds up. And so I say no more. I know what the rules are of the Senate, and I'm going to follow them. So have at it. Vote no on Ex-Im Bank.
Madam President.
The Republican leader.
This jobs bill that passed overwhelmingly in the House with only 23 votes against it, that is supported by the President of the United States, is ready to go down to him for signature. If we add the Ex-Im Bank to it, we only delay the passage of this bipartisan jobs bill, and we send it back to the House, and we don't know how they feel about the Ex-Im extension. We do know here in the Senate, as I just indicated, there is a significant majority in favor of passing this legislation, which we ought to be able to do very quickly. So I don't think there's any particular reason for delaying a jobs bill that is overwhelmingly supported on a bipartisan basis. Therefore, I would say to my friends on this side who are in favor of the Ex-Im Bank, I'm in favor of moving to that rapidly. I can say to the majority leader, as I said before, we'd be willing to agree to very few amendments related to the subject matter, and I would encourage him to turn to that soon, even though it doesn't expire, I believe, until sometime in May. With that, I yield the floor.
Madam President,
The majority.
go ahead and vote on a bill you favor. Vote against a bill you favor. Madam President, it's very clear. The only way to ensure that this program, Ex-Im Bank, advances is to see that it's attached to the House measure. No, clearly that's it. And I am very, very tired of this bill, the IPO bill, being referred to as a jobs bill. That takes a lot of gall to talk about that as a jobs bill. Madam President, we have a jobs bill that we, on a bipartisan basis, passed. After 5 weeks on the Senate floor, have I heard one word about from my Republican colleagues about a real jobs bill, saying why is the Speaker driving a nail in this bill that we worked on for 5 weeks? So, Madam President, understand that the surface transportation bill is a jobs bill. IPO bill is a nice thing to do if it were done in the right manner. And we had some amendments that were got rid of some of the bad provisions. And before this is all over, that may be just what happens.
Madam President.
The Republican leader.
If I may, let me just say to those who are watching and those who are interested in the Ex-Im Bank, if I had my good friend Harry Reid's job and I was the majority leader, we'd be turning to the Ex-Im Bank next, right after this, and we'd be doing it with very few amendments, because the advantage to being the majority leader, obviously, is you have the ability to schedule. So I just want everybody who's following this issue to understand that if I were setting the agenda, the next item up, right after this bipartisan jobs bill, would be the Ex-Im Bank.
Madam President, remember, anyone that can read and all, we can all do that. Read the morning press accounts. Cantor of the House leadership has said that he does not support the Ex-Im Bank, that my amendment, sponsored by Democrats and Republicans, was a partisan maneuver. They are not about to take the Ex-Im Bank unless it's part of the overall package, and that's why we're doing it this way. So, Madam President, as my friend, the Republican leader, says so clearly, he's not the leader, I am. And we have a number of very important issues that we have to deal with. And Even though I believe in the XM program, it's going to drop to the bottom of the calendar because we have things we have to do.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on amendment numbered 1836 to H.R. 3606, an act to increase American job creation and economic growth by improving access to the public capital markets for emerging growth companies, signed by 18 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on amendment number 1836 to H.R. 3606, an act to increase American job creation and economic growth by improving access to the public capital markets for emerging growth companies, shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Bekich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. DeMint. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Noe, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Carey, Mr. Carey, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson, Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Senators voting in the affirmative. Senators voting in the affirmative. Akaka, Baucus, Bekich, Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Boxer, Brown of Massachusetts, Brown of Ohio, Cantwell, Cardin, Casey, Conrad, Coons, Durbin, Feinstein, Franken, Gillibrand, Hagan, Inouye, Johnson of South Dakota, Carey, Cole, Lautenberg, Leahy, Levin, Manchin, McCaskill, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Murray, Nelson, Nebraska, Nelson of Florida, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Rockefeller, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Warner, Webb, Whitehouse, and Wyden.
I'm saying if the tree were not fallen, there'd be an opportunity also to amend it. And people couldn't talk about that.
Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Blunt, Bozeman, Burr, Chambliss, Coates, Coburn, Cochran, Corker, Cornyn, Dement, Enzi, Graham, Grassley, Hatch, Hoeven, Hutchison, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson, Wisconsin, Kyle, Lee, McConnell, Paul, Portman, Risch, Roberts, Rubio, Sanders, Sessions, Shelby, Thune, Toomey, Vitter, and Wicker. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Heller, aye. Mr. McCain, no. Mr. Lugar, no. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Ms. Snow, no. Ms. Murkowski, no. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Crapo, no. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Lieberman, aye. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye.
Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote? Hearing none, on this vote the yeas are 55, the nays are 44. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam President,
The Majority Leader.
can we have order, please? Madam President, for my members, we're going to have a conference at 5:15 in the LBJ room. I've spoken to the Republican leader. We'll have no more votes tonight. We'll determine a time in the morning to have the next vote or votes, and we'll move on from there. So, again, send my senators, 5:15 in the LBJ room. Note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate just finished a couple of votes to limit debate on amendments to the small business bill. The second one failed. It dealt with the Export-Import Bank. The measure would extend the bank's charter for another 4 years. Its current charter expires on May 31st. We heard an exchange between Majority Leader Reid and Republican Leader McConnell before the vote. Senator Reid wanted the measure included as part of the small business bill, while Senator McConnell said it should be brought up as separate legislation because adding it to the legislation means the bill would have to go back to the House.
objection.
Mr. President, when the Senate completes its business today, I ask unanimous consent the Senate adjourn until tomorrow, March 21st at 9:30 a.m. Following the prayer and the pledge, adjournment proceedings be approved to date. The morning hour be deemed expired. The time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, the Senate be in a period of morning business for an hour. During that period of time, the senators be allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided between the two leaders or their designees. The Republicans will control the final half, majority of the first half. Following that morning business, we'll resume consideration of H.R. 3606. Finally, that the time from 2:30 to 3 p.m. be as if in morning business to acknowledge the milestone reached by Senator Barbara Mikulski of Maryland as the longest-serving woman in the history of our country in Congress.
Without objection.
If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask it adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow.